This is DontCallTechSupport. In this video we're looking at the first generation Ryzen Summit Ridge and how it compares to the FX and Phenom II line of CPUs. For testing, I used an MSI Tomahawk B350 motherboard with 16GB of 3200MHz DDR4 memory, CL16, and R5-1600 at stock and overclocked speeds. Stock is 3.2 GHz base clock and 3.6 GHz boost, but the CPU ran at 3.4 GHz base clock with 3.7 GHz boost, and overclocked I just ran all the cores at 3.7 GHz. I did use the Rate Spire cooler that came with the CPU. AMD threw the bulldozer pile driver architecture in the bin and started from scratch with Zen. Instead of a clustered multi-threaded design, they went with a simultaneous multi-threaded design. Zen is built on a 40nm manufacturing process, down from the 32nm of pile driver. Ryzen CPUs are based on a chiplet design, with each chiplet, or CCX, consisting of 4 physical cores and 8 logical cores. Here's a die shot of one CCX, as opposed to the bulldozer design where cores shared a substantial amount of resources. In Zen, only the L3 cache is shared among the cores. The first generation Ryzen CPUs consisted of 2 CCX chiplets with up to 4 on Threadripper. The chiplets are connected through what AMD calls the Infinity Fabric. The Infinity Fabric is replacing the traditional North Bridge and Hypertransport used in previous AMD designs. It handles all the communication to and from and in between the cores. The frequency of the Infinity Fabric is connected to or dependent on the memory frequency. So if you're running 3200 MHz memory, the frequency of the Infinity Fabric will be 1600 MHz. What that means is that the faster memory you run, the higher the bandwidth of data transfer to and from the cores will be. Think of this as the North Bridge overclocking we did with Phenom II, where an increase in North Bridge frequency increased our performance. But enough talk. Let's see how the first gen Ryzen compares to AMD's previous designs. Specs of the FX and Phenom II systems can be found down in the description. And let's start off with Cinebench R20. In Cinebench R20, the R5-1600 dominates the older AMD CPUs. At stock speeds, the R5-1600 is 56% faster than the FX8350 at 4.6 GHz. We don't gain much from overclocking, only about 7% improvement with a 9% increase in clock speeds. The R5-1600 overclocked score is more than double the Phenom II 6-core CPU. And if we move on to power consumption, we can see here at stock speeds we're sitting at around 70 watts idle and 154 watts under load. This is equivalent to an FX6100 at stock speed, but with much better performance. Overclocking increases our power consumption under load by 17% to 180 watts, 140 watts less than the FX8350 overclocked. Ryzen is looking good here, but how is the memory performance? It does, after all, have an impact on Ryzen's performance. Memory read speeds is the fastest of these CPUs, but that comes as no surprise as it is DDR4 3200MHz versus 1866 DDR3 for the FX and 1600MHz DDR3 for the Phenom II. Read speeds was 47,855 megabytes per second, but if we take a look at the memory latency reported by IDA64, it is 81.6 nanoseconds. This is quite a bit slower than the earlier AMD CPUs, which is around 65 nanoseconds. This has been improved in Zen Plus and will probably be further improved upon in Zen 2, but we'll know that next week. Now let's move on to the gaming benchmark. Starting off with Fortnite, the R5-1600 was close to 6% faster than the FX6300 with 123.4 frames per second on average. Now overclocking doesn't do much for the averages here, but it does improve 0.1% low by 15%, and at this point it seems that we're limited by our GPU. Moving on to Rainbow Six Siege. Again, the R5-1600 is the fastest, but it's just under 2% faster than the overclocked FX8250, and it does appear that we are GPU bound once again, so it looks like it's time for me to grab a faster GPU. I mean, I could lower the settings, but any excuse to upgrade, right? Anyway, overclocking doesn't do anything, and it actually comes in just behind the stock R5-1600, but these are margin of error results really. It's the difference is very, very, very small. So next up is The Witcher 3. Here we see more of a difference between the new Ryzen and the older CPUs. The R5 1600 is close to 9% faster than the overclocked 8250 and has a much better 0.1% low. Now do keep in mind it also consumes half the power of an overclocked FX8250. Again, overclocking the Ryzen marginally improves performance. The last game we're looking at is The Division 2. This is yet another game that we're getting GPU bound in. Should have thought of that before I started testing at these settings. Oh well. The Ryzen is the fastest in this test with an average of 67.8 frames per second, which is only 2% ahead of the FX8250. But if we look at the 1% and 0.1% low, they are 15 and 6% better respectively. So what do we learn here? Well, we see that the Ryzen is a good upgrade from AMD, but in most of these games, the older AMD CPUs was also able to deliver decent performance with a GTX 1070. Undoubtedly, a faster GPU would paint a different picture here, with the Ryzen being much further ahead, but I probably won't do another video with the new Zen 2, but I do have one more video in mind for this series, but that will have to come out at a later date. Next week I'll be busy testing Zen 2, if I can get my hands on one, that is. I already got a motherboard. I went with the X470 Taichi. Reason being quite simple. The X470 chipset supports all 3 generations of Ryzen CPUs, while the new X570 chipset only support the 2nd and 3rd gen CPU for some reason. Anyway, that's all I have for you this time. I hope you have a wonderful day. Now I'm off to watch the new season of Stranger Things.